So I'm Tyler, and today I'm going to be talking about the death penalty. So a little bit of history about this. The first established set of death penalty rules was in 18th century BC, when King Hammurabi, who was famous for his Hammurabi codes, codified the death penalty for 25 different crimes. This ranged from simple theft to murder. And now we fast forward to a few hundred years, when the immigrants came to America, they brought along their capital punishment, which was used in Europe. And in 1630, there was the first recorded execution in America. And so also, at the time, the death penalty could be used on anyone from being a juvenile to someone who was mentally handicapped who might not deserve the death penalty. And so after this, there were many movements that ended the death penalty, and in the 1960s, people brought up that the death penalty was considered cruel and unusual punishment, and according to the 8th Amendment, was abolished in general. After discussion from the Supreme Court, it was ruled that the death penalty was unconstitutional, but only in a few cases, so the death penalty was reinstated. And now, the countries are starting to abolish the death penalty with some help from the United Nations. And so my main claim of this is that the death penalty provides benefits for society, and my supporting data are that the death penalty is not economically viable, there are political difficulties, and most importantly, does not actually deter crime. Alright, so for the death penalty being not economically viable, according to the Death Penalty Information Center, Texas, each death penalty case in Texas costs $2.3 million, which is 3 times the cost for imprisonment for over 40 years. And even with this, the death penalty, the murder rate is still one of the highest in the country. And also in California, capital trials cost 6 times as much as non-capital trials. By abolishing the death penalty, California could theoretically save over $90 million, which could be put towards programs like homeless shelters or towards after-school programs. And then there are also, Georgia laid off over 900 correctional personnel because they couldn't afford to have them there because the death penalty just cost too much. And also, New Jersey laid off over 500 police officers because it was also expensive. So, if we have to get rid of these police officers to support the death penalty, why still have it? It's just the murder rate's still gonna stay the same. And now for my second point, there are political difficulties in this. And so the United States is one of the only democratic countries that still uses the death penalty. And then France has completely eradicated the death penalty and will even harbor fugitives in their country to prevent from receiving capital punishment. And according also to the Death Penalty Information Center, America has a 3.69% higher murder rate and a 13% higher rate than France. And in Congress, almost every Democrat out there is running opposed to the death penalty. Even a large percentage of Republicans are also against the death penalty. So there's debates about that. And although the United States is ranked ninth nationally for the number of persons sentenced to death, the votes to repeal the death penalty are even higher than that, with 62.5% in favor and 37.5% against. And so even people who are greatly affected by the criminal's actions do not support the death penalty. As we all know, the Boston Marathon bomber, who killed about 17 people, only 33% of Boston residents support the death penalty for the Boston bomber, and that only 57% of people believe that he should receive a life sentence rather than the death penalty. And so for my final claim, death penalty does not actually deter crime. And so according to the Gallup poll, 64% of just an average citizen do not believe that the death penalty deters murder crimes. And also now criminologists, they believe that 87% of criminologists believe that the death penalty will also not have any significant effect on murder rates. And so in 2016, the murder rate for states that did not have the death penalty was 4.49%, while the murder rate for states that did have the death penalty was 5.63%. This is about a 25% difference, and also the states that did have the death penalty, which should deter crime, had a higher crime rate. And so, also Florida gave 3,000 prisoners early release, and according to the Death Penalty Information Center, only 20% of the people who are released early are rearrested. And so, Jeffrey Fagan and two of his collaborators recently compared murder rates in Hong Kong, where capital punishment was abolished in 1993, and Singapore, where the death sentence is mandatory for murder and other crimes. So the researchers found that the two countries, even though they had two completely different views on the death penalty, they had a very similar crime rate. Right. And so the summary of all this, death penalty does not actually benefit society, and points to this are: it is not economically viable, there are political difficulties, and it does not actually deter crime. Thank you.
I think it's a presentation issue, and maybe it's just the way it came across at the beginning, but I was completely confused about your original proposition because it sounded like you were going the exact opposite direction that you ended up heading. And I thought, well, wait a second, what is... Because when you first said things in the proposition in the preview, a couple of those points sounded like they were, like the first and the second point sounded like they were going the opposite direction. Then you got to the third point, it says it doesn't deter crime, and said, well, wait a second, what's the original proposition? And then you, as the second point, as you go to your first point, when you get to the body of the speech, the economic viability issue becomes a little bit clearer. So there's something in what you said at the beginning that was a little bit confusing. I'm not sure if the wording was incorrect or if you just said something and it sounded different than it was. So it just took me like 30 seconds to figure out what the hell was going on, and it shouldn't be that confusing. I think it's a little bit easier. Part of the problem is that you spend this, first minute giving a history of the death penalty instead of telling us what your position on it is going to be. If you gave us a history of the death penalty and at every one of those points you showed that it didn't work, it wasted time and energy, boy, when I get to your proposition, I'd probably know which direction you're going in. As it is, most of that information is not particularly germane to the issue at hand. Once you get to the body of the speech, I thought that you did signpost the points pretty clearly. Like I said, it was a little bit clearer once you got to the main body of the speech which direction you were going in. And once the evidence starts showing up, then it's very clear which direction you're going in on this particular point. I do think you have a tendency to give me pieces of factual data, statistics, and examples without providing me with any sources on that. So for instance, there's one place where you say Georgia laid off 500 police officers because of the death penalty costs, and that was New Jersey, and Georgia laid off the prison guards because of that. And I'm going, and where does this information come from? This is an example that you're pointing to, and I don't have any source for that. The cost of California's death penalty is generally in the ballpark of what I've heard before, but you don't give me a source on that. And even the Texas statistic about what the average cost of the death penalty was, that was a little bit vague. The statistical information on the higher murder rates, I assume that that's probably coming from some kind of Department of Justice statistic, but you should make sure that you identify that. And then we've got a lot of public opinion information that's being used to support a claim of fact, which I think is a little problematic, that people believe that it works or that it doesn't work, that people want it or they don't want it. That I think is a little bit less germane to the question of whether or not it is effective or ineffective. If you were going to make an argument about the political problems on this, that this is dividing people, preventing us from fixing particular problems, creating difficulty for law enforcement agencies, I think that's maybe the direction that you could go in on that particular point. You had a statistic that said 87% of criminologists say it doesn't create the impact that it's supposed to, deterring crime. And again, that's one of those things that in this situation, these people are much more specialized there, but I would want to know if that was based on research that they did or if it's just a poll, because again, I think the poll is probably less convincing than the research would be. If you could say 87% of the research that gets published suggests that it doesn't deter, I think that would be a little bit stronger. And 600 prisoners who were released and then rearrested in Florida, I don't know exactly how that applies to the death penalty issue and what points you're trying to make there. That was a little bit confusing. I mean, I know they released 3,000, only 20% were rearrested, that's 600, and I'm not exactly sure how that benefits your point, and it's not really about the death penalty, so that was a little bit confusing. All right, thank you.